ICQ Podcast, episode 363, The Lost Tribe, The Pied Piper and the Executive. Well, hello fellow Amateur radio enthusiasts. Welcome to this, our 363rd episode of the ICQ Amateur Radio Podcast. Supported this episode by Mark Weber, AB4 India X-Ray, and our monthly and annual subscription donors. In this episode, Martin MRB is joined by Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, and Leslie, Golf 0 Charlie India Bravo, to discuss latest amateur radio news. Myself, Colin, M6BRY, rounds up the news in brief, and this episode's feature, Frank K4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, discusses the Lost Tribe, the Pied Piper and the Executive. Well, as always, we'd like to thank our annual monthly subscription donors who continue to help us out with our running costs and paying our way on the internet. And along with those subscription donors, we'd like to thank Mark Weber, AB4 India X-Ray, for his one-off donation as well. Mark just wanted to send us a note to thank us for doing the show. And Mark, we'd like to really thank your support for what we do. If you've enjoyed the show and you'd like to show the value you got from the show, it's a very easy thing to do. All you need to do is go to icqpodcast.com/donate. Look at the options there on the page to support your favourite amateur and radio show, and select one of those and pop it our way, and you'll help us pay our way and keep the bills going, and keep us investing in the show. So we'd really appreciate your support. Right, now we're going to join Martin, Dan, Edmund, Ed and Leslie to discuss and generate thoughts about the latest amateur radio news, including a new VP0 call sign and ordering pizza with Morse Code. As always, hope you enjoy.
Well, hi guys, and welcome to episode 363 of the ICQ Podcast Roundtable, and this episode's News Roundtable. And tonight I'm joined by Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU. Hi, Dan.
Well, hi, guys.
Good to have you, Dan. We also got Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG. Hi, Edmund.
Hello, Martin. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, hi, mate. And good to have you. Moving to Germany, we've got Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Good evening, everybody.
Evening, Ed. And last but not least, back by popular demand, Mr.
You bribed them.
I did. Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB.
Good evening, Martin. And my right arm is wrapped up with, he's got super glue and sticky tape and holding it all together.
Yeah. What are you going to tell people what they nickname you at work?
Oh, yeah, glass. Because I'm fracture easily.
Yeah. Oh, that's cruel.
I know.
Yeah.
I love them to bits, the scoundrels.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with these here news stories. Now, first news story, we now have a new prefix. VP0 as a new prefix for us. Sounds an interesting one. Ed, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, can do. VP0 is the Falkland Island dependencies. The Falkland Islands used to take care of a lot of the British overseas territories, islands in the South Atlantic, and also the Antarctic sector, British sector, if you like. And this has taken several years. There was some documentation or some regulations, I should say, changed. I think it was in 2017, which, because of the way they were done, the Falkland Islands then only issued amateur radio licenses for the Falkland Islands and not for anywhere else. So all the others were left without any issuing authority, regulatory authority. So the people it really affects are the DX petitioners who want to go to these remote islands to put them on the air. And so anyway, the decision was taken a while ago, so maybe about a month ago, to have this VP0 prefix for the various areas. And what we've got here is a news story about just the British Antarctic territory, which is the British part of Antarctica, plus a couple of islands, including South Georgia and not including South Georgia and South Sandwich, but including South Orkney and South Shetland Islands. And they've actually issued now some draft documents to be reviewed. And a couple of us on this podcast have already sent our comments in where we found some pieces that could be improved. And hopefully they'll take that in mind at the FCDO in London and come up with some very good regulations for down there for people who want to go and operate de-expedition-wise. So it's watch this space. There's the other islands, as I said, the South Georgia and South Sandwich will most likely come up with some documentation as well. But this particular documentation is only the BAT and the South Shetlands and South Orkneys.
Yeah, no problems at all. And glad you had a look at the document for them, Ed. I know that sometimes it's very difficult to proofread your own. I know because I did a presentation the other week for Sutton and Cheam, and I thought it was 100%, and 3 people had looked at it, and I gave it to Chris, and he went, I found 3 mistakes in your presentation. And so it happens.
Yes.
Yeah. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
My thoughts are, well, I've not worked that part of the world before, so I'm looking very, very forward to when they start getting stations up on the air. I don't think it's going to happen tomorrow, but it's certainly a watch this space story. And yeah, when we're doing the Silverthorn camp, and we like sort of working interesting places like this, so it's look forward to it.
Sounds good to me. Dan, have you ever worked down to this part of the world? I suppose, Morse, you probably do better than most of us.
I actually have. I've worked VP8 a couple of times. So if this is another DXCC entity, I'll be able to put another notch in my belt.
Right. As I say, it's an interesting one. Well, say if you get another DXCC entity, then I'm sure lots of people will be happy. Edmund, any thoughts on this one?
I'm not a DXer and I've never worked anywhere that starts Victor Papa. So with that level of experience, I'm afraid there's nothing I can add, Martin.
Well, I agree with you. I've never worked a Victor Papa. Worked a few VKs though recently. Hi, but that's another story. But yeah, as I say, nice that there's something happening that's a little bit different. Next news story, I looked at this and it said laboratory test model of a Sputnik 1 produced in 1957 has just gone up for sale. It's a 1-to-1 size scale, full size. And in the news article originally, it looked as if to me, with my English knowledge, it was going for about 85 euros. And I thought,
I'm just falling off my chair laughing, Martin.
Yeah, well, I thought, it's 85 euros. So I went to the website and it went, no, 85,000.
That's the opening price.
Go first, Leslie.
Oh, yes, this is a laboratory test model of a Sputnik EMC EMI in 1957. And Martin's quite right. We looked at it initially and thought it was 85 euros. And the starting bid is 85,000 euros. And auctioners estimate between 150,000 and 250,000 euros. And you've got your fees, your 29% VAT sales tax on top of that. Now, apart from falling off my chair I was just thinking about it. I mean, you know, when radio amateurs go to their local junk cell, you know, they go to the cell and they hide the thing in the back of the boot. Well, how do you do that with a satellite? You know, and they buy it sort of on the pretense, well, it might come in useful one day, you know, and actually how the sort of planning and strategy and of trying to get it in the house without your other half knowing. And I was in tears of laughter thinking about this, but I personally think it's going to, laughing aside, I think it's probably going to go to a museum, something, a sort of government museum, something like that. Yeah, I think it'll probably end up that way. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. It'll be an interesting piece of history. That yeah, I wasn't in the hobby at the time, and I don't think. Well, Dan, you might have been, but I think you're younger than me, so we would have probably remembered Sputnik, but I wouldn't have heard it. Dan, what's your thoughts?
Well, no, I wouldn't have been old enough then. I was only 2 years old at the time, Martin. But I'm going to guess that there won't be an amateur radio operator buying this thing. We're just too cheap.
Oh, we're skinflints. We really are, you know.
I agree.
Oh, careful, boys, careful! Don't upset the listeners. No. I knew you were younger than me, Dan. Yeah, I would have been what? If you said you were, I'd have been 4 when this went up. So yeah, bit before my time as well. But I do know that lots of amateurs spent a lot of time listening to the Sputnik and receiving it, and I think it's
because it transmitted on 15 meters, correct?
Yeah, I think so. And there was a couple of years ago, people built a replica of the transmitter as well, because that was about for a while. But this is the real thing. Edmund, what's your thoughts?
I've spent a very enjoyable day at Amberley Museum today, and in our vintage radio wireless exhibition hall, I noticed that there is a space on a shelf, and I was wondering what we could fill it with. So if any generous person out there has got at least 85 grand knocking around that they don't know what to do with, and if they want to donate it to a museum so it could be viewed by the public rather than being locked away in somebody's private collection, then I'm good on qrz.com. And I think you're right, Dan. Yes, it was somewhere around 21 megahertz. It used to go beep, 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 didn't it? But apart from the historical interest in this, I'm not really sure why anybody would want to buy it. I mean, you certainly couldn't repurpose it for anything on 15 meters.
File the crystal down, you know.
Well, yeah, but then that would spoil it, wouldn't it? And last but not least, I made the same mistake. I read it as 85 euros as well. If it had been 85 euros, I mean, that's the price of a handheld, isn't it? So I might have put a punt in, but at 85 grand, I don't think it's me who's going to be winning this and putting it in the forthcoming ICQ podcast museum.
No, even my credit card wouldn't stretch to that.
Hey, don't go promising things, Edmund, that we can have a museum. I'm already in trouble for setting up the digital group with Colin. No, not true. But
well, we could put it in your front room, couldn't we?
Yeah. Mrs. Butler would love me, wouldn't she? Oh, God. Yeah. What's that old bit of rubbish in the corner? Yeah, it's all right, dear. It'll be okay. But
just don't tell her how much it cost.
No, in fairness, and I'll bring you in a minute, Ed. In all fairness, she's often not the one that cribs over the cost. I look at something and I go, I fancy one of those, but I can't really justify it, and I'll look at it for a while. And if it's something I really want, I know I can go and get it. But she'll eventually say to her, "Oh, just go and get it." You know, so I don't have the how much does it cost routine, because it's completely different. I mean, yeah, when I was down at Yaesu with doing the FT101D review, Mrs. B said to me, "Do you want one? 3.5 grand." I looked at him and went, "Yeah, I want one." And it's a great radio, and I couldn't find anything wrong with it, apart from the fact that I wouldn't use it, because I'm not a particularly HF person. I don't have particularly good antennas, and I wouldn't really want to be bouncing a 3.5 grand radio around going out portable. So that's where I lost out on that one. Anyway, Ed, what's your thoughts?
Well, it's part of history, and as everybody else has said, my guess would be this is going to be bought by a museum somewhere, and good luck to them. But even for a scientific model like this, it's not the real thing that went up to space, because that burnt up. I can't see any way that it's worth €85,000. But it'd be interesting to watch and see what price it actually goes for, because that's only the starting bid price. But there it'd be interesting to know which museum it ends up in.
Yeah. And when you're paying 29% VAT on top of that, and probably the auctioneer's fees as well, it's going to be a very expensive device. So,
Ouch.
very much so. So I think we're all agreed. We doubt if an amateur's going to buy it. Not when they crib about how much when you've got something on the stand that's worth like 3 times what they want to pay for it.
Hey, here's something interesting. You can get the schematic of the transmitter on the website, on a website.
No way. Yes?
Yeah.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, just Google Sputnik transmitter schematic and you'll find it.
Oh.
Yeah, they did have a go at building it, didn't they? About a couple of years ago, they were building replicas of the transmitter. So
yeah, it's kind of cool.
Right, moving on to the next news story. This is just a bit of fun. When I spotted it, I thought, Dan's our main Morse man. Do you know what? Dan, you can now order pizza with Morse code.
No.
Well, it can. So Dan, do you want to go first on this one?
Yeah, there's 2 problems with this story, though. One, it's in the UK, so I don't think I could get the delivery over here with that pizza. And secondly, it's Papa John's pizza, which is not my favorite. But it is a very interesting promotion, I must say.
It certainly is. I mean, how often do you get Morse code brought into the public eye, that sort of level? So it could be interesting. Go on then, Leslie. You're a Morse man.
All right, okay. They're just sort of finding a sort of marketing edge, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's fine. This is what they do. The only thing, I mean, I don't eat pizza myself because I can't eat cheese, but there you go. I'll tell you one story, funny story I had. It wasn't funny to me at the time, but afterwards I saw the funny side. And we ordered some food online. And when you go on the PC, there's a little motorcycle that comes up and shows you where it's coming from and where it's going to. And you can follow the motorcycle. And so I ordered some food, and the motorcycle came up, and I swear this thing was doing the grand tour of London. And I just watched it go in the opposite direction and then disappear off the screen. And I can't say what I said at the time but I'm looking at this screen and going absolutely crazy. But that's my experience of buying food online. That was my first and the last. So I'll give this one a miss if you don't mind.
No problems at all on that one. No problems at all. And let's say a bit of fun. Ed, what's your thoughts?
Yeah, I'm just looking at what's actually behind this. It's obviously a publicity thing they're doing, but it's linked into the latest Call of Duty game release. And indeed, in there's even an Easter egg that's Morse code related. So I'd advise or recommend the listeners to simply go to your favourite search engine and do a search on Morse code in Call of Duty, and you'll get a load of things about the Warzone Morse code and bunker and various things within Call of Duty. So it could also be that in the game Call of Duty you need to understand Morse code. That would be interesting if that's the case, but there's certainly a link there of some kind, and that the pizza delivery or the pizza cooking and delivery company is taking advantage of that is great. Why not? So reading another article on it, I believe you can even get a Morse code and buzzer delivered in the bottom of your pizza box. So I'm presuming it's a 2-level pizza box. So I don't know if that's just a random thing or whether that's part of the winnings of the game or whatever. But anyway, it's if you look at the show notes, the link to the website with information will be in there. But hey, it's a good bit of fun, and it's getting publicity for Morse code. So back to you, Martin.
Yeah, certainly is. Certainly is. Now, I know he's going to go all modest on me because he was doing Morse the other week and I didn't know he could do it. But yeah, Edmund, I think you've already signed up for this, haven't you?
Well, I should just say that this story is not me at all. For a start, I have no experience of, knowledge of, or interest in Call of Duty, and I don't think I've ever ordered a takeaway online. I'm so old school. If I have a takeaway, I walk to the local fish and chip shop, collect it in person, and pay in cash. How 20th century am I? Nevertheless, I thought, why not tap in the website that appears in the show notes? And if you put the URL into your browser without the /win at the end, then it takes you to a page where it assumes that you've already got your little Morse code buzzer kit and it wants you to turn on your microphone and press your button and make sure that your PC can hear your kit beeping away. So it's predicated on you already having one of these kits. However, if you put /win at the end of the website address, it takes you to a page where you can enter your vital statistics. And if you happen to be a lucky winner, and I can count on one hand the number of things I've ever won in my entire life, so it's not very likely to be me. But if you happen to be a lucky winner, then they send you one of these Morse kits, buzzer things, whatever it is, through the post. So if that arrives here, rather than a box containing a cold, soggy slice of pizza, for example, if the kit arrives, I will build it and I will do a review on a future edition of the ICQ podcast. And I might also see if I can build a little transmitter to put on the end of it and go on HF with it. How about that?
Sounds good, Edmund. But the other thing is the main prize that the majority of people are going after is a complete set of, I guess, publicity bundle and the latest Call of Duty game. So, you know, it's interesting whether there's two levels of winning here or whether you have to actually buy the Morse code kit or whatever. But good luck, Edmund, and we'll wait with bated breath to see if you win at least the Morse key and the buzzer. That'd be quite nice.
If I win the Morse key and the buzzer, then as far as I'm concerned, I've won the lot. And if I win anything else on top of that, Call of Duty merchandise or a soggy slice of pizza, I will send it to you through the post, Ed, straight away.
I don't want the soggy pizza through the post. or the Call of Duty, actually. That's not my scene either.
In fairness, guys, though, the mention of the soggy pizza, I'm going to try and get it back on a sensible level. It would only be soggy if it arrived 4 or 5 days later through the post, and we're pretty sure they wouldn't do that. So, guys, that's one thing.
Well, it would do the speed the post goes, wouldn't it?
Well,
it'd get eaten at customs because customs from the UK to Europe's now taking about 4 or 5 days. So somebody in customs will eat it.
I can tell you a story about that one day, but not now. Yeah, and the other thing is, for those of you wondering what Call of Duty is, if you're not a computer gamer, it's a shoot-'em-up game. Military shoot-'em-up game where you shoot the enemy and blow the enemy up and one thing and another. It's a war type game, possibly with some strategy in it as well. Yeah. That's about as much as I know about it. But as I say, nice little promotional. It was meant to be a bit of fun from us, and you know we no axe to grind with Papa John or anybody else.
It was a fun story.
Yeah,
fun story, Martin.
Yeah, just fun. Right, moving on. The ARRL Clean Signal Initiative is on the horizon. Dan, I lifted this one from your website, so I'm going to ask you to go first on it.
Oh, no problem. So we all know Rob Sherwood of Sherwood Engineering. He's the guy that does all the receiver tests. Well, in the last year or so, he's now turned his attention to the cleanliness of transmitter signals. And he's found them to be lacking, even in some of the higher end transceivers. And he's given talks on this. In fact, on my website and probably in the show notes, there'll be a link to a YouTube video of a presentation he gave to your amateur radio club, the Sutton and Cheam Radio Society. And due to his work on this, one of the ARRL directors, Mike Ritz, W7VO, has taken up the mantle and gotten a committee organized to possibly set standards for transmitter cleanliness. And I think this is a great thing, especially as now the band conditions are getting better, the bands will become more crowded, and it's important that our signals are as clean as possible. And in the U.S. regulations, anyway, there's certain standards that should be met. And anyway, this initiative has gotten off the ground. The committee's had their first meeting. And it's got some heavy hitters on it. This Ritz, Mike Ritz, W7VO, has recruited fellows like Ward Silver and some other RF engineers, and we might actually see some standards here.
That'll be good if they do clean it up, Dan. And as I say, what Rob was saying is that receivers have improved, but the transmission side hasn't kept up with improvements on receivers. So it's a good thing. Okay, Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, let me jump in and ask Dan, as the expert on this, a little bit about the Clean Signal Initiative. This isn't a situation where everybody and their brother is going to take their existing radio to an ARRL table at a hamfest or whatever, is it? It's they're going to look at the new radios when the new models come out, or the existing ones that are on sale at the moment. So that's my understanding. Is that correct?
Right. I would suspect that to be the case, that they'll concentrate on current models and future models.
So that the actual manufacturer can make some changes, whether it be firmware changes or actual physical hardware changes to clean up the radios. That would be good because, of course, the majority of the radios that are sold in the US are also sold in a very similar form in the rest of the world. So if, let's say, Yaesu or Flex or somebody, nothing against those makes, by the way, whichever one you choose, but if there's some problem found, and I'm sure both of those manufacturers would fix the problem very quickly, it would get fixed worldwide, not on new machines at least, or on existing models and new models, not just in the US. So this is actually a benefit for the whole world of amateurs, not just the US.
Right.
Yeah, and, well, it's a benefit as a whole. I mean, going forward, why shouldn't the transmitters kept up with receiver performance? I mean, if we're probably hitting a plateau in receiver performance. So now if you can clean your transmitters up so they're that much sharper and better, then that would help the receivers, wouldn't it? Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Well, Martin, this is a much more serious story than the giggly ones we had earlier. But I think I've gone through it, and I think it's an excellent initiative. A couple of things I picked up on was it sort of links in with the manufacturers, which is great. And he talks about manufacturer committees as stakeholders. The committees can be cumbersome at times. Standards require consensus for them to be effective. Well, I would argue that it's in the manufacturer's interest to go along with this because it makes their products better. When they work in R&D and in any sort of manufacturing environment, there's things they're going to miss. And by having somebody say, well, this is really good if we do it this way, and I think that only good can come of this. It will bring the standard of transmissions up, which is great.
Yeah, I agree 100% with you on that one, Leslie. And if we've got a standard, we've spent ages improving receivers. If we can now improve the transmitters, brilliant, in my opinion. Absolutely brilliant.
So I think I'll also make one other comment that Mike Ritz wanted this to be an ARRL standard at first, but I think he's quickly seen that it could be a good thing to make this an IEEE standard, which would really make it a professional standard. And of course, as I say, the committee making and decision making, it does get to be a bit cumbersome, but the IEEE has been very effective at standards, and doing this will make the standard that much better too. So I'm, like I say, I'm all for it, and I think it will be a good thing for ham radio.
I'm going to mention one other thing. Is Rob Sherwood. He does a lot of very, very interesting videos on YouTube. So I think they're very much worth looking at if radio amateurs are interested.
They certainly are. And Rob, is driving this one forward. And like Dan said, and I think we all agree, a nice new standard for transmission can only improve not only our hobby, but all transmitters. Because things that we learn, the commercial market will learn from as well. So I think in long term, this should be good. Okay, next news story. A broadcaster in the ham band on 40 meters. Another one, Ed. Germans, the DARC picked this one up, didn't they, Ed?
Yeah, the DARC picked up the story, but they didn't take the action. The people behind this is actually the Bandwatch organisation. And what actually happened is that an AM broadcast station appeared on 7160 kilohertz on October 22nd, and they were on there for a good quarter of an hour and basically wrecked the band for most of Europe and the Middle East between 7155 and 7165 kilohertz. And the end result was, of course, the complaint went through, Bandwatch caught it, and this is a part of the band that is allocated on a primary basis to amateur radio now. And they tracked down the people who were behind it, and in fact, it was a transmitter in Tashkent, Uzbekistan, that was under contract to a German company called Media Broadcast, a very major broadcaster. And they've responded, and the response was they had actually been commissioned by Media Broadcast to broadcast on 6040 kilohertz in the 69-meter radio band. They assured that this was a one-off incident and apologized for the inconvenience. So this is a major company in Germany is putting the hand up and saying, sorry, one of our contractors stuffed up. We're responsible for them. It won't happen again. Good that they get that kind of a reaction. So thanks to DL3RTL, who is the head of Bandwatch in Germany, who was behind this and got some very quick results. And it's very rare we see this happening, so it's a nice bit of news. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah. And one correction, Ed, 49-meter band, not 69-meter bands, but yeah, no problem.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah. 6 megs is 49-meter band. That's right. Because we discussed this before the recording, and we said, well, maybe they're meant to be on the 41-meter broadcast band, but that doesn't tie up at all. Somebody's misread something or something, and basically human error. At the end of the day, we're all human. It only actually took place for 15 minutes. So I think what came out of it was actually more positive than the problem that occurred, as in the company responsible apologised and they'll make sure it won't happen again.
Yeah. Edmund, you do a lot of listening and one thing or another. So did you spot this one?
I didn't actually hear the transmission, but when I read the story, my first instinct was, were they planning to be on the 41-meter band and had gone 100 kilohertz adrift? Because in Europe, 7.2 to 7.3 megahertz is part of the 41-meter band, and I have heard transmissions quite strongly in the past on 7260, although I think that frequency from memory is predominantly used by China Radio International or some such. In actual fact, it turned out they should have been on 49 meters, which is 5,900-ish to 6,200-ish. So they were well adrift. I'm not really sure how that would happen, but yeah, it was all sorted out very quickly, as the other Ed has mentioned, and a good outcome for everybody. So a bit of a result there. And if they'd stayed on 7160, they'd have probably upset the Work Tool Britain net, who I actually heard this morning for the first time on 40 meters in a very long time. They had decamped for a long time down on 80 meters, around 3760. So the fact that I heard them on 40 meters for the first time today is possibly yet more proof, if any more proof were needed, that Solar Cycle 25 is getting going. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, no problems. Well, I think the solar cycle is picking up, as we'll discuss obviously again and again. Dan, your thoughts on this one? I mean, okay, it's a European thing, but any thoughts?
Well, as I've said on past podcasts, I just love the way folks in Europe and Region 1 in general monitor the bands. I wish we would have more of that here in Region 2 in the U.S. Like I mentioned also on the last podcast I was on, we're getting a broadcaster down at the low end of 30 meters. And what it appears to be is a second harmonic of their fundamental frequency, which is 5.05 megahertz. And, I've reported this to the ARRL because that's our reporting mechanism here. But I just heard this same station just last night. And it's just in this case, I think it's just sloppy engineering. I mean, how can a second harmonic be strong enough to be like S5, S6 on the 30-meter band? It just boggles my mind.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's bad engineering. And I do wonder whether everything has gone module these days. Everything's just plug in any module. I do wonder whether the engineering standards are lower. I could be totally wrong on this, guys. Don't rip me a new head. But the other thing is that, I just wonder, it could be a training issue with some of these people. You put... everything's money. You can get a junior to do these jobs and they don't get checked, then maybe we're in for more of this sort of thing. I don't like the idea. Leslie, what's your thoughts?
Listening to what you're saying, Martin, I think it was just a mistake, to be honest. And I have to say that just putting their hands up and saying, there was a mistake, it shows the company in a good light. Things happen and they putting it right, which is when you listen to companies and they're not giving you, they come out with an excuse and you go, no, this is totally the opposite. And good on them for doing that. That's the right thing to do when there's a mistake.
Yeah, in more ways than one, because if you do something wrong at work and you own up, the grief is never half as bad as you expect it's going to be.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So, they did own up, which is a good thing. Okay, moving to our last news story. High school students learn how to use ham radio. And this, I'm pleased that it was being done. This was actually happening in the States, so I'm going to pass it to Dan first. But is this common practice that they teach ham radio in school in the States, or is this a one-off?
Well, there are some schools that do have some programs that teach ham radio. I wouldn't say it's the rule rather than the exception. But what I like about this story is they got the kids involved in a simulated emergency test. And we just had that here in the U.S., and I'd be hard-pressed to think of any organizations that did that. I think this is a good example of something that the emergency coordinators around the country should do is, find a school and get the kids to participate as well.
Yeah, it's brilliant. And I mean, the other thing is that I find if I say I'm going to go and play radio on Saturday, if I've got no reason to go out on Saturday, it kind of always gets lost and it doesn't happen. If there's a purpose to it, then it happens. And if, like here, they're doing a simulated emergency, that's a reason to do it. And it would happen and make life more interesting for them, I just suggested, Dan.
Yeah, no, I agree totally. That's it's a great thing.
Yeah. Okay, Leslie, go for it.
Yes, it's a very, very good story. I think one of the reasons why it's taken off is you've got a Michael Torkson, apologies for getting the name wrong, NC3PO. What you need is a project champion. If there's a licensed teacher, someone like that can move these projects forward. And when you're talking about a simulated emergency, I think that's a good thing as well. Hopefully, they are never, ever, ever used. That's what you want. But one day they just might be. Over to you, Martin.
Yeah, let's hope they never are used, as you say, but a good thing if people know how to do some of these things. Ed, what's your thoughts on this one?
Well, not a lot to add. Just the preparedness, but at the same time, it does give a little bit of an introduction to the children into amateur radio and the fact that it's there if everything else fails. And the fact that Michael Torgerson is the teacher at the high school obviously means he might be doing this again next year and the year after and all the rest as the next Great American Shakeout earthquake preparedness exercise takes place, I guess, annually. And this is also, the story was actually not just in the press, it was actually on KTVL, which is their local TV station, I believe. So, all good, a good story. And let's hope that, as you say, they never need to use the communication from there. But if they do, and if they're in I don't know if this is in, where was it, Medford High School. It's in Oregon, I think. I don't know if that's particularly an earthquake-prone area or not, but the fact that they're prepared is always good.
I agree. If they have a purpose, then that's a good one. Edmund, you spent time with me at JOTA, and I've mentioned it more than once. The youngsters are interested in this stuff, aren't they? They do get a buzz out of it. What's your thoughts on this subject?
I think some youngsters are more interested in amateur radio than some people might give them credit for, because yes, it's old technology. Yes, in some respects it can seem very primitive compared to everything that they've got at their fingertips in the form of modern technology, smartphones, the internet and all that kind of thing. But those very same reasons why at face value it might not seem particularly interesting and appealing could also be the same reasons why it is. It's so different to anything else they would ever do normally. It's novel, and certainly for the groups of young people that I saw at Jamboree on the Air when I came up to visit you at Banstead, Martin, with the exception of the last group of the day, by which time they were probably getting hungry or bored or overwhelmed or whatever. All the other groups who came round during the day were really, or seemed to me anyway, to be really engaged and interested and, enjoying themselves as they went round the Scout Hall, taking part in the various activities, which yes, did include me trying to do an impression of somebody who knew CW. So, like we've said, hopefully it will never be used, but it's a good introduction to amateur radio in general, and it can only help to encourage young people. And I think, as I say, young people are perhaps more fertile ground than some people out there might give them credit for. Back to you, Martin.
Yeah, I was saying, I think this is overall was a nice one to finish on, and good on the teacher for doing it. I think the students would have had great fun because of purpose, and they would have got some knowledge out of it, which is great. And I must admit, I've learnt a lot through amateur radio. And, I was never good at geography. I wouldn't say I'm good at it now, but at least I know where a few more countries are than I ever did when I was at school. So there you go. Right. That's what we've been, that's the news stories done. Let's find out what the guys have been up to since the last time they were here. Now I'm going to go left to right across my sheet. So, Ed, what have you been up to?
Well, I guess the most major thing is since last show, I've had another couple of SOTA activations, and I've now reached the magic 1,000 activator points. So I can now call myself a mountain goat. And so I can also react a little now and activate for fun rather than chasing points. Because the next level is 10,000 points, and I don't think I'm going to get anywhere near that ever. But that's nice now to have that one in the bag. I'm not sure if it was after the last show. I think it was, but I took part in the ICQ podcast Digital Voice Modes meetup that Martin and Colin arranged, and we talked with a few of the listeners, and that was very enjoyable, and I look forward to the next one whenever that is. Hint, hint. Love getting QSL cards, and I just remembered, related to our article earlier in the news section here about VP0 and VP in general down that way, I actually got the QSL card from Bob in Stanley, VP8LP. I worked with him a couple of months ago on sideband on, I think it was 20 meters, but I'm not sure. It might have been 40. But in any case, it's still nice to get the paper QSL cards. The home station, I've been very busy as well. I've been out in like 1 degree weather this afternoon, finally putting the antenna back up. 2 weeks ago, we had 90 kilometre plus winds, which broke 2 of the masts supporting my main antenna, which is a 40-metre horizontal wire loop. And one mast I could repair, the other one I had to replace. So I've actually put now a heavy-duty mast from Spider Beam up there, and this is no fishing pole. The other fiberglass masts are fishing poles. This thing is so solid, it's a world of difference, but it's also heavy because of that. But anyway, so there's been a fair bit of work going on there, but the station's back on the air fully now. So yeah, quite a few things since the last show, Martin. Back to you.
Yeah, sounds like you've been busy. And on the ICQ Digital Hub meeting, yes, Colin and I are pretty much going to have to make a decision this week, I think, because we're getting fairly close to needing to give people enough time. I have been looking at when the best time in the world to do it for the most people, and unfortunately, you and I, it's not the best time for you and I, Ed, but we will try and rotate. As I said, I'll rotate the time zones round a bit. I will move it to see if we can get some more people into the mix and go from there. Right. Edmund, what have you been up to?
Well, on the same weekend as Jota Jamboree on the Air, I also took part in the ICQ digital group chat in the evening, and before it started I had the pleasure of speaking to Richard, Whiskey Bravo 3 Echo Golf Delta, and Richard subsequently very kindly sent me a QSL card directly, and many thanks, Richard, if you're listening to this, and I have sent you an envelope through the post with several different cards in it for your enjoyment. I doubt you will have received it yet, but it should be arriving at your home in the very near future. On top of those things, it was also Exercise Blue Ham both days that weekend. But due to a combination of Jota and the ICQ podcast event on the Saturday, and being out pretty much all day on the Sunday with my wife, I didn't actually manage to work any blue ham stations on 5 megahertz 60 meters at all. So having spent quite a long time on the previous edition of the podcast building it up and publicising the event, I then failed to make a single contact, mainly because I was listening very late in the evening, and I think most of the activity was during daylight hours, shall we say. I did hear just one station, Mike Romeo Echo 31, was it? Something like that. But they weren't very strong with me, so a bit of a failure there on my part to actually work anybody at all. The following weekend was CQ Worldwide, so not being a contester, I left the wire extensions clipped onto my 40-metre dipole, but last weekend the skip distance on 60 metres seemed to go very long indeed, to the extent that I barely heard anybody in the UK at all. It was nice to hear stations from overseas, of course, mainly Germany, but didn't manage to work anybody in the UK. And in fact, the net that usually takes place from 8 o'clock in the evening local time on 5371.5, that is now moving time-wise, the same frequency, but it's now switching to 11 o'clock GMT in the morning instead on Sundays, with effect from the day that this podcast is released. There's a Facebook group, and Selim Mike Zero X-Ray Tango Alpha is the man behind that, I get the impression. So more information, go on to Facebook and look for the UK 5 megahertz 60 meter group. So that was really all the radio I'd done until today being Wednesday the 3rd of November when we record this. And I spent the whole day at Amberley Museum, and from 10 o'clock in the morning till 3:30 in the afternoon continuously, we were on 40 meters. We were on pretty much the same frequency the whole way through. We very rarely had to call CQ. At times we had a mega pile up, and I can honestly say 40 meters was in the best condition today that I've heard it for years. It's how I remembered it when I first got licensed, filled with stations from all around the UK, some of them very, very close to us. Amberley Museum is in West Sussex, and we were working stations in Hampshire and Kent with rock solid 5 and 9 signals, very little QSB. And as I mentioned earlier, I actually heard the Worked All Britain net on 7160 for the first time in, well, years probably. So if anybody was in any doubt as to whether Solar Cycle 25 was coming alive and the critical frequencies going up and up and up quite early in the day as well, then today would have put it beyond any doubt. Conditions on 40 meters were absolutely superb, wide open to the UK and nearby continental Europe. And I think we had something like 55 QSOs, which compared to a few years ago is mind-blowing. A few years ago, we could quite happily sit on 40 meters the whole day, and we'd be lucky if we worked half a dozen stations, and most of them would be in Italy or in Southern Europe, or certainly not anywhere near to the UK. So this does bode very, very well, as I must say, and I'm crossing my fingers that it will carry on in that vein. So yes, I'm all amateur radioed out today, Martin, after not having really done very much for the last couple of weeks.
Well, it sounds like you've been having fun, though, which is the most important thing. And as I say, I'm going to apologise to you because I was down your part of the world on Saturday, and I did put a couple of calls through Worthing Repeater WO. I was down with the family, and they were chasing me. We weren't far from your house, actually, but down on Shore and Beach. But yeah, maybe another time. Right. Dan, what have you been up to since last time I spoke to you? And well, before you go, thanks very much for your feature last episode. It was very enlightening.
Well, great. I'm glad you guys enjoyed the feature, and I hope we get some grant proposals out of it. As to what I've been up to, like the other guys have said, the bands have been really good, and I've been on the bands during the CQ Worldwide Sideband Contest. Well, I'm not much on sideband, so I wasn't in the contest, but I got on 30 meters, and that evening was able to work both the Lesotho DXpedition 7 Papa 8 radio uniform and the Galapagos Island DXpedition HD8R. It only took me 3 calls to work Lesotho, and I got the Galapagos Islands on the first call. So how cool is that? Just amazing. And since we're talking about features, I'll thank Ed for his feature on the Open GD77 software. I actually purchased the GD77 and downloaded the software and got it programmed with the new software. I haven't had a chance to use all the features yet, but I think that's going to be an enjoyable thing. So that's really what I've been up to lately.
Yeah, well, I've seen you come up on the talk group a couple of times, Dan, or seen you in the log. I haven't been on at the time you've been in, but I have seen you up. So I guess you've got the DMR radio now. So that's good news. That's good news.
Yeah.
Right, Leslie, what have you been up to since the last time we spoke?
Well, the last time we spoke, I've been broken and I've been trying to repair myself. Had an argument with should we say, I tried to bounce off a lump of steel and I came off worse. So I've been trying to recover and fix myself. I know we made a joke about it earlier, but unfortunately that's as mean the amateur radio side has been shelved a bit while I sort of try and get better. But I'm a lot better now, and it's I can move my arm and it's all great. So that's where I am, Martin.
Right, no problems. Well, as long as you're getting yourself sorted, that's the good one.
Yes.
Yeah, and I take it you're still going to the club.
Oh, absolutely. No, the physio said I have to lift so much weights so often. So I did an engineering interpretation on that.
Yeah. How heavy is a pint of Guinness?
Exactly, you got it.
Oh dear! No. I'm being naughty. Sorry, listen.
Well, it's true.
All right, no problems. Well, at least you're getting better, which is
yes, definitely. My sense of humour, I didn't lose that. So
that's the good thing. That's the good thing. Okay, well, I've actually been pretty damn busy, so I'm going to run through these fairly quickly. Did do some HF operating for me. That was quite good. I was out with Chris a couple of weeks ago. He took his camper van and he wanted to set up an ARRL on his camper van, and we did that and got it all set up for him for when he's away. And we did a bit of operating. That worked very, very well. Have been on 2 meters, 4 meters, and 70 SEM. And local contacts mainly around where I live. 4 meters does seem to be quite busy, which is good. The digital talk group, if you'd have asked me how it was doing at the end of last month, I'd have said, well, I've had a quiet month. Yeah, I haven't done so many. It's been reasonably quiet. And then I downloaded the stats and had a look at them. And we had at least, and there is a reason why I can't give you this as 100%, but at least 23 new call signs have gone through the talk group in the last month. We did 2,769 connections, and we got 2 new countries. The new countries were Cyprus and Romania. So we're now sitting at 35 countries throughout the talk group. I also did a presentation for Sutton and Cheam Amateur Radio Society on the ICQ podcast talk group and how it's progressed from a concept to where it is at the moment, and that seemed to go down quite well. Been working on infrastructure on the project. We're moving some of the infrastructure into our own domain, and there's been work going on that. So hopefully you won't have noticed too many outages. I don't think there's been too many, but we have had a few glitches a couple of times. But it's now fairly stable, and I'm quite happy. I did get hijacked a little bit early part of last week, and got chatting to my friend Phil, VK6ADF down in Western Australia, and he was telling me he just got himself a VoIP phone and he'd signed up for Ham Shack hotline. And I thought, hang on a minute, I've got a VoIP phone sitting in my junk room that I bought brand new. Mrs. B didn't like it, so we didn't use it. We used a different method of doing VoIP when we had the landline at home. And so I got it out. I signed up for an account with Ham Shack Hotline. And Ham Shack Hotline is a free VoIP service, but it only works for you to be able to call other amateur radio operators. You can't phone your mum or your girlfriend or whatever. It has to be another ham within the system. So I've got a VoIP phone sitting in the shack, and I'm in their address book as well. Not sure how much I'm going to use it, but you can listen to a few broadcast things that go on. People have routed BBC World Service into it, so you can dial up BBC World Service and listen to that. There is a Morse Code practice session running, if you can dial in and listen to that on the phone. And there are ways of connecting to certain digital functions and not hotspots, but certain repeaters and talk groups, although I haven't played a lot with that. Have resurrected an old hobby with Mrs. B just to get out and about. We're out geocaching, so done a few of those over the last week. And for those who don't know what geocaching is, it's a bit like treasure hunt with a GPS or a phone, and you go off and you find these little hidden devices, and normally inside them is a log, and you write your name in it and then log in online and say that you found that one. So it's a nice little way of doing things. And last but not least, did play with Wires X in PDM mode. Now, PDM mode means you don't have to use the ARRL 200. You can set your radio up so it talks straight out the data port into your computer. You run the Wires X software on your computer as you would normally with a ARRL 200. The only downside of this is that you can only connect to digital groups, so or digital rooms. So if somebody set it up as a digital and analog, it refuses to connect. And unfortunately, I reckon about 70% of them are all digital and analog. So there weren't many I could connect to. And then when I did connect to a few, I found that it was just people were connected and obviously gone to sleep. You know, I came across a room, there were 10 people connected in it, and nobody was talking, nobody was listening. Put a call through, nothing. So probably won't do too much of that, but it was a technical exercise of just seeing if I could do it. So been kind of busy, I think. So there you go, guys. That's what I've been up to. So on that note, I'd like to thank the guys for joining me tonight. I'd like to thank Mr. Dan Romanchik KB6NU.
Well, thanks again for having me.
No problem, Stan, and it's been great as always. I'd like to thank Mr. Edmund Spicer M0MNG.
Thank you for having me on, Martin.
Yeah, no problems, Edmund. Good one. I'd like to thank Mr. Ed Durrant, DD5LP.
Thanks for the invite. Looking forward to the next one in a month's time, or 4 weeks' time.
Yeah, we'll get there, Ed. We'll get there. And Mr. Leslie Butterfield, G0CIB. Thanks for joining us tonight, Leslie.
Thank you for the invite, Martin, and it's been really good, especially what's happening over the last 6 weeks or so. Thank you.
Yeah, no problems. Well, I know your shift patterns are all messed up at the moment, and you were going to be with the other group, but the work are messing you around a little bit. But we'll accommodate it. Don't worry, Leslie.
Cheers.
So yeah, right. All's left for me to do now is to say 73 to you all, and we'll continue with the podcast. 73, guys.
Cheerio.
73.
7-3.
7-3.
Keep your amateur ham radio podcast advert free by donating less than a length of coax. Visit www.icqpodcast.com/donate now. For all the news, links and information, visit www.icqpodcast.com.
And now it's time to have a look at the news in brief with me, Colin M6BOY. News here in the UK for trainers and those looking for the amateur radio licence that the Exam Standards Committee in the RSGB has agreed that the current mock exam papers on the RSGB website should be replaced by a fresh set with one mock exam paper per licence level. Unlike previous mock exam papers, which were based on example questions, these new papers are generated from the same ERSRG vetted RSGB question bank as the real exam papers using the same question selection process. So we'll pop a link on the ICQ podcast webpage where you can find out more information and maybe have a look, see what is coming down the path for your trainees in the future. In Denmark, their beacon Oscar Zulu 7 India Golf Yankee, which is an 8-meter beacon operating at 40.071 megahertz that was turned off at the end of August. Well, good news. As of the end of last month, they replaced the faulty part that was causing a problem there with a faulty trimmer in the power amplifier stage, and they've got that beacon back on the air. So look out for OZ7 India Golf Yankee. And a bit of a special event to look forward to. On the 7th of December, a Pearl Harbor Day Memorial event station will be taking place. The Navy's 3rd Fleet Spectrum Manager and the Battleship Iowa Amateur Radio Association are going to be working together to bring the call sign November Echo Papa Mike, which is the legacy Navy call sign there they've got to use. They'll be using that on the 7th of December in Memorial Day for Pearl Harbor. Operation will be between 1600 and 2359 UTC, and they'll be transmitting at 14781.5 kilohertz using J3E USB, and you can also listen at 14343 kilohertz J3E USB as well, upper sideband. So amateurs reminded they may not transmit on that band. If there is traffic on that band, then operators will find alternative frequency when listening. So we'll also pop, most importantly, a link to the Battleship Iowa's Amateur Radio Association's webpage, and you can keep up to date with the information that we're going ahead there for that special event on the 7th of December. Right, we know we head over to our features episode. Frank Howell, Kilo 4 Foxtrot Mike Hotel, and his feature, The Lost Tribe, The Pied Piper, and The Executive. As always, hope you enjoy.
And now, what you've all been waiting for, this episode's feature from the ICQ podcast.
Hello, this is Frank, Kilo 4 Fox Mike Hotel, with another feature for the ICQ podcast. Do you think that the American Radio Relay League was the first national radio association in the United States? Or that the famous and brilliant inventor who started it also invented amateur radio? If so, you are not alone. But historical documents and the facts they contain tell a deeper and more accurate story. It's in the October issue of the Spectrum Monitor magazine, which you can find at thespectrummonitor.com. TSM is a wonderful read in my household. I go back as a subscriber to TSM's predecessor, The Monitoring Times, launched by Bob Grove years ago. My article is based on a year's research into historical documents of the early 1900s. Let me tell you the story. Amateur radio is nothing if not tradition-laden. Now, tradition can be an effective thing in a hobby or a group. It maintains a sense of common history to socialize new folks into the hobby, as well as providing a central focus on long-term activities. The history of a hobby is a key and enduring part of this set of cultural traditions. But if history as written and received is incomplete in important ways, this tradition misleads and misguides newcomers and veterans alike. Moreover, it may stifle future innovation due to the thought police behavior that traditionalists ritualistically perform. Just say 73s and watch the grenade go off in a group, for example. In this story, I recover some lost history of U.S. amateur radio. My focus is on the lost tribe of the earliest amateur radio operators who were in existence before there was an American Radio Relay League, before there were government-issued licenses, and before there were strict guidelines as to what was ham radio. Then ham radio was whatever ham radio operators did. It gave a foundation for what was to come as the federal government created a legal basis for administering the radio waves as a public good. Yet amateur radio operators in the U.S. today hardly know anything about them because of the maxim mythology that exists and is perpetuated in our most common formal history of amateur radio in the U.S. This is why I characterize them as the important lost tribe. Let me tell you about them and how they got lost to our current history. To illustrate, let me cover some of the folklore about early amateur radio in the U.S. Consider, for example, how the ARRL chooses to feature the history of amateur radio. In the official timeline published during the 2014 centennial celebration of the League, there is only a mention of the Junior Wireless Club being formed in 1909. It's now called the Radio Club of America, and that was followed by government licensing in 1912, and the formation by Maxim and Clarence Tuska of the League itself in 1914. The explicit narrative is ensconced in the foreword of the 50-year anniversary in the words of the author Huntoon.
In May 1914, a small band of radio amateurs led by the late Hiram Percy Maxim of Maxim Silencer fame and Clarence Tuska started a national organization and named it the American Radio Relay League. Since that time, the story of amateur radio has been the history of the League, the chronicle of amateurs working together for the public welfare and for their common good.
On the ARRL website, there is erratic mention of Clarence Tuska being a co-founder with Hiram Maxim, at times being labeled only as the founder. A search of this website for a central figure in this story, Hugo Gernsback, returns only a single article from a contributing ham about Gernsback's book, The Wireless Telephone, being found at a flea market. After my article in the Spectrum Monitor was published, there did appear one additional minor mention of Gernsback on the League's website. Now, this is a narrative of a public relations rendition of the history of amateur radio, not one based upon the narrative that can be obtained through written materials and pictures of the early 1900s. Well, there are perhaps some historical reasons for the League's omissions, including competition and conflict by the ARRL with Hugo Gernsback himself. But some of that omission is now corrected in the Spectrum Monitor article and in this feature episode of the ICQ podcast. In my research, I used early amateur radio and related publications supplemented by U.S. Census archives and genealogy records, as well as the use of geographic information systems to see where these earliest hams were located. As I'll tell you a bit later, the context of early amateur radio in the U.S. involved commercial publications as well as nonprofit groups, all trying to organize the earliest amateur radio enthusiasts. These groups had various reasons. Some of them were for selling merchandise, while others were for public service. The first tribe consolidated into public form was a set of blue-collar scholars who were figuring out this newfangled wireless radio transmission and reception thing. This was years before the ARRL was founded. They did have a tribal leader who encouraged them directly through his various media outlets and sales of radio apparatus. And indeed, much like the latter-day Popular Electronics monitoring calls, gave them actual call signs to use on the air. Now, this was before call signs were government-issued and required. Now, that person was none other than Hugo Gernsback of New York City. Gernsback also published their names, locations, call sign, and some measures of the strength of their signals from their transmitters, so that they not only knew who each other was, but non-amateurs knew who they were too. There were others trying to organize radio telegraphy enthusiasts, and for various reasons, but it was Gernsback who first reached out nationwide to give an organized tribal dimension to U.S. wireless operator enthusiasts. Now, in my story, I'll use names that you know well, like Marconi, Fessenden, Clarence White, and DeForest in this brief story, but let's set the stage first. Tribes in the early amateur radio in the U.S. are an important aspect of the context of how they got organized. Now, one definition of a tribe is a social group of a simple kind, the members of which speak a common dialect, have a single government, and act together for common purposes, as the British anthropologist W.H.R. Rivers wrote in 1914. Well, this set of emergent amateur radio enthusiasts were certainly organized in a simple way through a small set of focused national magazines and a few local groups. They spoke a common technical dialect of figuring out this newfangled radio telegraphy, how it worked, how they could practice the art and science of it. They had a government body, frankly, but not of the federal government, but based mostly on a new magazine publisher who gave them a sense of common direction, identities through call signs, and a common outlet to share their knowledge through this dialect of radio telegraphy. They were indeed an emergent tribe, but unfortunately one later lost to popular history. Now, I've constructed a timeline of key events in the early social history of amateur radio here in the States. It illustrates the emergence of technical wizards of the day like Tuska, Gernsback, Marconi, and DeForest. But it also illustrates how the executive visionaries like Maxim, Gernsback, White, and Fessenden also led the launch of not one, but 4 main groups to lend organization to these hams. Not surprisingly, competition for product markets and conflict subsequently ensued. I've organized them as a set of digitally narrated news announcements from a time-traveling shortwave radio receiver. Let's listen to this timeline.
In 1907, amateur operators formed the Bay Counties Wireless Telegraph Association in California. Hugo Gernsback is said to have sold the first practical home radio and first amateur radio kit. Clarence Tuska began experimenting with wireless telegraphy.
In 1908, Gernsback publishes Modern Electrics magazine. Announces wireless registry in October. A rival magazine, The Electrician and Mechanic, launched a wireless club, claiming 114 members by September. The Bay Counties Amateur Wireless Club in California was in operation.
By 1909, the first amateur radio organization called the Junior Wireless Club Limited of New York City formed in January. It later becoming Radio Club of America, which is still in operation. Hugo Gernsback of the Modern Electrics magazine also started the Wireless Association of America. Gernsback also published the Wireless Blue Book of the Wireless Association of America, the first nationwide public listing of amateur radio operators. This is a membership list constituting the Lost Tribe. Amateur operators form the San Francisco Radio Club Incorporated.
In 1910, Clarence Tuska buys an electrolytic detector from Hugo Gernsback's EI Importing Company in New York City. Tuska consigned his crystal radio to a local toy store in Newington, Connecticut, which was bought by Maxim, who could not get it to work. Tuska then tutors Maxim on the building of a better radio receiver. They form a father-foster-son bond and engage Maxim's son Hamilton in the radio hobby. Tuska worked with him and spent many an evening instructing Mr. Maxim and his son, said Tuska.
In 1911, the Ship Act of 1911 requires government-issued licenses of maritime wireless operators.
In 1912, the Radio Act of 1912 required all radio transmitters to be licensed by the U.S. government. Amateur radio is restricted to 200 meters in frequency of operation. Charles Stewart, who later became the ARRL vice president and primary lobbyist in Washington, D.C., gave testimony.
In 1913, Clarence Tuska of Newington, Connecticut, received a government-issued call sign of 1WD. Hiram Percy Maxim received the government-issued call sign 1WH. In May, Hugo Gernsback started another magazine, The Electrical Experimenter.
In 1914, the Hartford, Connecticut Radio Club formed on January 14. The first president was David Moore, age 21. During that same year, the American Radio Relay League was founded by Hiram Percy Maxim and Clarence D. Tuska in Newington.
In 1915, the magazine QST first published in December a list of American Radio Relay League stations. Hugo Gernsback's Modern Electrics magazine ended the Wireless Association of America and formed the Radio League of America with Tesla, Fessenden and DeForest as honorary members. The National Amateur Wireless Association was also founded, headed by Marconi with Clayton White, editor of the Wireless Age magazine, as managing secretary. Announcements of the association appeared in all major New York City papers. Marconi's group had an emphasis on assisting the military signal corps.
In 1917, all U.S. ham operation was ceased by government orders due to World War I.
In 1919, amateur radio returned to legitimate operation in the U.S. by November. Hugo Gernsback publishes the first radio amateur news magazine.
In 1923, Gernsback publishes first science fiction articles in Science and Invention magazine. It begins his eventual transformation to science fiction publishing and later a writer's award in his name for that genre.
In 1929, Gernsback publishes Radiocraft, a magazine for the radio constructor.
The key date regarding the Lost Tribe involves Gernsback publishing the first national listing of operating hams in 1909 called the Blue Book. It would be 6 years before the ARRL would publish a list of members in a 1915 issue of their new magazine, QST. A competitor to both, the National Amateur Wireless Association, founded by the famous Marconi and associates like Fessenden, claimed 114 members in their group, but they only identified the states in which they live. The National Amateur Wireless Association was mainly focused on assisting the military, which was a prescient activity that foretold the League's much later emphasis on public service communications. The Junior Wireless Club of New York, while in a hotbed of radio innovation, was really locally oriented until years later. It was rebranded as the Radio Club of America and still in operation today. But their history shows little competition with the ARRL. Now, there were oodles of other local clubs, prominent ones including those in San Francisco and the Bay Counties that appeared during this period. There were clearly numerous emergent organizations, all vying to catalyze enthusiasts of wireless telegraphy as amateurs. Yet, it was Gernsback and his allies who provided the first successful Pied Piper effort to publicly meet the definition of a tribe. As history shows, the Pied Piper metaphor fits Gernsback very well. As a key element of this revisionist history, it's clear that it was Tuska who was the technical wunderkind, not Maxim. Now, from his own words as published on the ARRL website, it is clear who Elmered whom and where he bought his radio parts from.
The electrical experimenter indicated that there were other wireless experimenters in Hartford. Hadn't Hartford heard of the famous EI electrolytic? A gentleman, Hiram Percy Maxim, had become interested in the wireless. Mr. Maxim had no experience, but he was interested and wanted a good receiver. Mr. Maxim was then in the novice class. He needed some instruction. Tuska worked with him and spent many an evening instructing Mr. Maxim and his son. Hiram Percy Maxim learned quickly and was soon the owner and operator of a full-fledged amateur wireless station. His son, Hamilton Maxim, was then about 12 years old. His younger mind outstripped his father's in learning the code, and he was a joint operator of the station, which was known as SNY.
Maxim thus became the executive, collaborating with Tuska to visualize a relay league of stations in 1914. He later worked with Charles Stewart to lobby Congress against the Navy's insistence on keeping amateur transmitters off the air after World War I. Now, Maxim was married to the daughter of the former governor of Maryland, which gave him an entree into political networks in the nation's capital. Undoubtedly, this gave Maxim some access to Herbert Hoover Jr.'s Secretary of Commerce, as noted in the ARRL memoir, 200 Meters and Down, The Story of Amateur Radio, which was published in 1936 and written by the ARRL Secretary of the day, Clinton B. DeSoto. By then, the story of U.S. amateur radio was that proffered by the League. Let's listen to the words of Sutton, ARRL secretary, who wrote the famous book 200 Meters and Down on the history of amateur radio.
Another organization was being formed in January 1909, one of much greater pretensions. The Wireless Association of America was a child of Hugo Gernsback, publisher of Modern Electrics. After a few months of existence, Gernsback announced a membership totaling 3,200. By November 1910, he claimed that his number had jumped to 10,000. It was easy to recruit members for such an organization. There were no dues and no obligations. Youthful electrical experimenters signed up in swarms, attracted by the famous names in the honorary membership group and the ease of becoming a member. The membership represented a fairly accurate index of national interest in radio, although not, of course, of the number of active transmitters. Even so, the number of worthwhile amateur stations on the air had, according to conservative observers, increased from perhaps 150 in 1905 to 500 or 600.
The ARRL's 1936 official story of amateur radio did indeed acknowledge Gernsback as a Pied Piper of youthful experimenters, albeit characterizing his counts as claims while giving full credit to the League's conservative observations. And moreover, the Wireless Association of America was given its due as a fairly accurate index of interest around the country in amateur radio. But by its 50-year anniversary, the League Secretary Huntoon stated that since that time, the story of amateur radio has been the history of the League. Having won the competition amongst the various groups seeking to organize amateur radio, the official public relations story by the ARRL was changing. But why was there not greater cooperation between the Maxim Tuska team and Marconi, the Junior Wireless Club of New York City, and the dominant presence of Hugo Gernsback's Pied Piper movement? As with many social movements, it was different motivations, vested interest, and the conflict over who would dominate the emerging market of amateur radio that indicates the best explanation. For example, the ARRL petitioned in 1916 to advertise in Gernsback's widely popular magazine, The Electric Experimenter, but was denied as a competitor at least 3 times. Maxim published the correspondence in a 1916 issue of QST without comment for the reader to assess. A letter in the same QST issue complained about all the leagues being formed, which were unnecessary. Conflict between the ARRL and Gernsback ruled the day. By contrast, Marconi's group focused on assisting the military signal corps, and they appeared largely out of the fray here. No doubt due to the growing Marconi business enterprise capturing most of his attention kept him out of this. Later, his affiliated magazine, The Wireless Age, did in fact accept advertising from the ARRL. But this conflict between the publications of the League and Hugo Gernsback and the ensuing bad blood between the principals may be one of the organizational memories leading to the omission of the many undeniable contributions made by Gernsback in the League's official narrative of amateur radio in the U.S. In the 2014 centennial celebration of the League, the ARRL's timeline had indeed forgotten its own published record of formative events. In this official timeline, there is only a notation of the Wireless Club of New York, followed by the formation of the ARRL by Maxim and Tuska in 1914. In Maxwell's QST article on the 100th anniversary of amateur radio itself, he notes the importance of recounting amateur radio history. End quote, as will be seen as we progress through the events of this past century, there is much to be learned from our history, end quote. As he later writes in that article, however, there's only a mention of Hiram Percy Maxim without Clarence Tuska in what gave organization to amateur radio in the U.S.
Some hams had extended their effective range by relaying messages through others, but it took a Hartford, Connecticut ham, Hiram Percy Maxim, 1WH, later 1AW, to recognize that messages could be sent more reliably over longer distances if relay stations were organized.
The Maxim mythology was by then complete. I'll revisit this in my closing, but who were these blue-collar scholars who made amateur radio possible by getting their gear built and regularly on the airwaves? Where were they, and what was their background? The members of the tribe from the first Blue Book were all white boys or men. The majority were young men with an average age of 19.6 years. The preponderance of boys and young men is striking. It was a kids' game of sorts in large measure. A very few adult men joined this tribe. Now, that is ironic given the aging amateur radio population in the U.S. as illustrated in my articles in the ARRL's National Contesting Journal in 2020. But I'll note a couple of extremes in these data. A 9-year-old, George Smith of New York City, and a 10-year-old, William Wilson, also of New York, were operators. Wilson became an engineer by age 40. 2 older married men were also part of this tribe. Thomas Shannon, age 49, resided in Los Angeles, working as a truck driver. A plumber, Jack Stirrer of New York City, was also 49. Both were clearly old-timers in this tribe. One oddity was Dr. Carol H. Fink, a physician near Jacksonville, Florida, living at Fernandina Beach. He was not found in the public census or genealogy files, yet was prominently noted in the Blue Book. Young Bowden Washington, age 17, was to become a commercial radio telegrapher by 1920, as was J.B. Hyatt in Ohio. Others were employed in electrical work as electricians, such as Charles Spinney of Maine. This list can be found in a Spectrum Monitor article or on my website at foxmikehotel.com. Now, where the tribe member was a student and not employed, I've examined the household head's occupation, and with a few exceptions, such as a couple of lawyers, all were employed in the retail, manufacturing, trade, services, or farming. In other words, blue-collar work. The professional influence by attorneys, the physician, the musician, or art designer is exceptional. The dominance of blue-collar work by the household head on the radio amateur is unmistakable for those that were identified through public census records. Hence, I've labeled the tribe as blue-collar scholars who helped amateur radio become a social movement in the United States. The Gernsback Pied Piper in the Electrical Experimenter served to play to the imaginations that changed the succeeding generations through radio science as a hobby. To understand this, the listener only needs to recall what Popular Electronics did for so many boys and a few adult men when it offered shortwave listener call sign, all run by Tom Nightel through a magazine and the U.S. Postal Service, far less than what Gernsback did a half-century before. Now, the tribe members were located largely in the northeast states of New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, and on the west coast in San Francisco's Bay Area, as well as Los Angeles. The key clusters in the greater New York area and in the Bay Area correspond to a few of the key events in the timeline I created. The early clubs were being formed on the West Coast simultaneously to those in the localized hotbed of greater New York City. This can be seen more clearly in a printed article and on my website through a map. This pattern, along with those scattered throughout parts of the U.S., reflects the impact that the Wireless Association of America, started by Gernsback through the Electrical Experimenter and Modern Electrics magazines, had during this formative period. So the Lost Tribe was dominated by young white men, influenced by highly popular national magazines, and energized by the Pied Piper Hugo Gernsback. Technical wonderkins like Clarence Tuska helped Hiram Percy Maxim and his son get into the game through what was later called Elmering. But the technical core was Gernsback, whose Electro Imports Company sold the first kits for Tuska to get Maxim going in amateur radio. Maxim's exceptional executive skills, along with being a very accomplished mechanical inventor himself, parlayed the Tuska partnership into a practical use case for the amateur, sending relayed messages over long distance quicker than they'd ever been done before. So here's some revised history on how U.S. amateurs got organized. From any careful and objective reading of the literature of that era, it is clear that Hugo Gernsback gave national identification to amateurs, publicizing a listing with call signs which gave them a public identity. His magazines and commercial company, Electro Importing, gave a venue through which members of the Lost Tribe, as well as those who didn't join, could communicate with others using a common language of the day regarding amateur radio. These blue-collar scholars were the lifeblood of amateur radio's rise in the U.S. Even Maxim benefited from Gernsback's electrical products through Tuska's building of Maxim's radio set in tutoring who he called the novice Maxim and his son Hamilton into the hobby. What is also clear is that it was Hiram Percy Maxim who won the war over who was going to succeed in being the dominant organizational force in the ham world, at least in the United States. Maxim and Tuska co-founded the ARRL, but Tuska subsequently went into the military and then commercial radio to support his mother, grandmother, and himself as the head of household. Maxim, the executive, protected amateur radio from Navy objections with Secretary Hoover through Maxim's political network, no doubt enhanced by his deceased father-in-law, the former governor of Maryland, and Charles Stewart's effective lobbying in D.C. Stewart later became the vice president of the American Radio Relay League. My characterization of Gernsback as the Pied Piper who led young boys and men into the hobby reflects the historical facts from the existing literature of that era. Maxim was the executive who learned the technical side from his young associate Tuska, partnering with him and giving financial assistance to form the league. Maxim powerfully led the ARRL to be the dominant organization that it ultimately became over the years. That too fits the existing literature, but it is at variance with the Maxim mythology created and perpetuated over the decades by the public relations arm of the American Radio Relay League. Well, that is the mission of public relations professionals, but not of historians. From the time of Sutton to Huntoon to Maxwell in writing sequential official ARRL narratives of U.S. amateur radio history for the League, the transference of the credit from a token mention of Gernsback's 10,000-strong membership in the Wireless Association of America by Sutton, to Maxwell's rendering of it taking Maxim to get amateur radio organized, with nary a mention of Tuska, the mythology was complete. Along the way, the tribe and their leader got lost in the League narratives. But without the original amateur radio enthusiasts, there would have been no need for a national organization. But clearly, with Marconi's group moving into commercial and military interest, Gernsback hanging on in the publishing world but eventually drifting into science fiction writing and publishing, the Junior Wireless Club of New York City being locally focused for a long time, the American Radio Relay League established itself as the premier national association in the U.S., speaking on behalf of ham radio and getting hams to follow them into the future. It's unfortunate that those who got us here are not honored in the official history narratives by the League or other associations. That is a public relations choice, but it's just not an accurate history. As Maxwell himself said in the QST article on the 100-year history of amateur radio, there is much to be learned from our history. I hope that this brief story and the written article in the Spectrum Monitor does indeed reveal more about the blue-collar scholars that Hugo Gernsback led into the fold in the Lost Tribe. Listeners can find more about this research on my website, foxmikehotel.com. I want to give narration credit to Mike N5DU, Mike K5XU, and Rod VA3ON. Thanks, guys. Well, that's it for this time. This is Frank, Kilo 4 Fox Mike Hotel, saying, ICQ, do you?
The ICQ Amateur Ham Radio Podcast, serving the amateur ham radio community fortnightly since 2008.
Well, many thanks there to our friend and colleague, Frank Howell, K4, Kilo Foxtrot Mike, for his feature on the Lost Tribe, the Pied Piper and the Executive. And as always, I hopefully something there to generate thoughts and opinions from yourselves, and we'd love to hear your thoughts. The best way of doing that is go to icqpodcast.com and click on the Contact Us button and drop us a line. Talking about that, Ronaldo, I think it's pronounced, Tempo, Mike 0 Romeo Tango Kilo dropped us a line. I enjoyed your feature on the portable power supplies in episode 361. I made 2 this spring. A friend received some bankrupt stock from an electrical vehicle manufacturer and gave me 2 48-volt lithium-ion battery packs and 2 battery management boards. The value of those batteries is around £500 each, so I wasn't going to let them go to waste. Lithium-ion technology is superior to lead acid as the chemistry allows them to be used across the full charge range. Lead acid batteries like to be permanently charged. I agree with your advice to use ammo boxes as an enclosure. After much looking on eBay, I came to the conclusion that ammo boxes are the cheapest way of getting a good steel enclosure, and they look cool too. Certainly agree with you with that. And he's given us a link to his website, which we'll put up in our show notes. I hope you don't mind, and say for everyone else to have a look, because you're quite impressed with Ronaldo's handiwork, aren't you, Dad?
Certainly am, and the gentleman Liam has made a very, very nice website showing pictures of what he's got. And the beauty of building them yourself is you get what you want, not what somebody else thinks you might want. Now, Ronaldo, I haven't got 240 volts built into mine, which I see you have on one of yours. However, I've got a 240 volt or 12 to 240 volt inverter that I can use if need be. But you built what you wanted, and yours does look very, very nice. I'll give you that. I'm very, very impressed.
Yeah, so certainly check out the photos we're going to put up on the show page for episode 363, and certainly look for that. And not only that, but it's extremely tidily well made, isn't it? It's not like a messy messy hacked together sort of kit that he's done. It's a very, very tidy job. So certainly very well played to you, sir. And as I say, certainly I suggest everybody else check out what Ronaldo has made, because it's well worth checking out what he's made there. Right, well, as I say, we would really like to thank our donors this episode, and our donors, as I say, help us pay our way on the show. So the monthly subscription donors, along with Mark Webber, AB4 India X-Ray, we really do appreciate you, as I say, helping us out. If you would like to show your value from what you received from the show, then the best way you can do that is to visit icqpodcast.com/donate. Think of a monetary value of what you find from the show, and select one of the options, or make up your own figure and send it our way. And we'd, as I say, greatly appreciate you helping us out, as I say, with the show. So, as I say, certainly consider us from there. Right, Dad, digital tool group time. So, any updates and news in relation to the very successful project there we're building away and say continue to make improvements on?
Yeah, Colin, and I mentioned earlier in the podcast, but let's recap here. I said that if you'd have asked me how well we did in October, I'd have said, yeah, it was a pretty standard, not over-exciting month. Then I looked at the figures, and in fairness, we went up by at least 23 listeners, joined us, 23 more people. And there is a reason why I can't give you 100% on that, but 23 is not bad. We did 2,769 accesses to the talk group, which was an increase over the previous month. And we also had 2 new countries, with Cyprus and Romania joining the talk group. So up on the website, you can see the number of contacts we've had and all that sort of thing. And you can see the countries that have gone through the ICQ podcast talk group. So that's the positive. Just a quickie now. The Wednesday after the podcast has been released, we're about to start migrating our internet services into our own domain, another set of services on a different provider. So hopefully you won't spot any outages, but if things just disappear for a few seconds and come back, then you know that that's what it is, and we'll try and keep the downtime to the absolute minimum. I will put any major outages up on the website, obviously, but we're not expecting any. And last but not least, the Digital Hub, Colin, our ICQ Podcast Digital Hub get-together. We've got a date, haven't we?
Yeah, we do. We certainly have a date then. Better make sure I check this and make sure I get this right. So the date we have for us is going to be the 29th of December, as I say, and we'll just confirm up the definitive hours there. So as I say, we're trying to make sure we make it as relevant as we can to as many time zones as possible. And we're hoping the fact being between Christmas and New Year, that I say we can cover as many time zones as possible, and with people maybe not necessarily going about the usual daily working parts of the world. So fingers crossed. I say that'd be a great date for us to have our next one on, and so keep an eye out on your newsletters, etc. And I say we'll shore up the definitive times for you and publicise that over the next few days, and update that as well in the next episode. So, but give you an idea, it's going to be the 29th of December. So, yeah, looking forward to that one, Dad. It should be good.
I think so. And don't forget, if you don't have a digital radio, you can either come in via DroidStar, or you can still listen via the Hoseline application within Brandmeister. So you're all welcome.
It certainly is. Right, we need to wrap up this episode though. So I'm just going to do our last thanks here to Dan, Kilo Bravo 6 November Uniform, Edmund, Mike 0, Mike November Golf, Ed, DD5 Lima Papa, and Leslie, Golf 0, Charlie India Bravo, for taking part in the news roundtable with you. So I think that just about wraps up all our bits and pieces here, Dad. I think the last thing to do is to send you scurrying into the kitchen to make a cup of tea and see if there's any treats in the cupboard this week for Mum.
Yeah, we'll do that shortly. Nice cup of tea for Mrs. B with a chocky Becky, and sit down and relax for a bit. Now this one's pretty much in the can for me, apart from just doing the final listen to make sure everything's okay. So that's a good one, Colin. 363, eh? We're getting there.
True. Well, as always, thanks a lot for listening, and we'll catch you all again in a fortnight's time. 73's all.
Yeah, 73.